and welcome to the Tyndale House podcast. I'm Francie Cornes. I'm the Communications Officer here at Tyndale House, and I'm joined again by Tony Watkins, who's the Fellow for Public Engagement here, and Peter Williams, who is the Principal at Tyndale House. And in our last episode, we were looking at the book of Amos and how to read it. And in this episode, we're going to look at Jonah. So we'll do similar to what we did last time, looking at the background of the book, then digging into the text a bit, and then talking about the audience. And this will be probably a two-part episode, depending on how quickly we get through these bits. So let's start with the background. Who was Jonah and what was going on in the world that he lived in?
Okay, the book of Jonah only tells us that he is the son of Amittai, but he does appear in 2 Kings 14 during the time of Jeroboam II, who was king in the northern kingdom of Israel. So 2 Kings 14:23, the 15th year of Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria. He reigned for 41 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from all the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. He restored the border of Israel from various places, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, who was from Gath-hepher. So he is living, presumably, Gath-hepher is one of the places in the region called the Shephelah, the foothills between the mountain spine up the centre of Judah and Israel, and the coastal plain where the Philistines lived. But Gath-hepher, not far from the Philistine city of Gath.
Mm-hmm. So that little passage is saying that the king is doing things because Jonah's told him to.
More that he's incredibly successful because, and that's in line with a positive prediction that Jonah made. And some people will build something on this cameo, and I think it's fine. We've only got a few clues that the only other thing we know about Jonah other than this book is that he makes some wonderful, positive prophecies about Israel, which then get fulfilled. Expansion. And so you could see that as, he'd like the positive message there. Of course, at one level, he likes the idea that God's enemies will be overthrown, which eventually is a message he's prepared to deliver. He really doesn't like that they're going to do okay. So you could try and put these together and imagine that he's, think of him, let's say, as a patriot who wants Israel to do well and does not want Nineveh, the Assyrians, to do well. And that can explain quite a bit in the book. Obviously, we're making a lot out of just some hints, but it seems reasonable. I mean, it's at least consistent.
Okay.
And that reminds us that Jonah is a very different kind of a prophetic book. So it is one of the 12, what in English we often call minor prophets. It's part of the scroll of the 12, the 12 shorter prophets that were included onto one scroll. But it is so different from the other prophets because it's not the words of Jonah, apart from this one line, 40 more days and the city will be overthrown, in chapter 3, and his prayer in chapter 2. But it's not primarily the announcements of a prophet to the people of God, and yet we have this account that he was saying things to God's people about what was going to happen, and those are not recorded for us. So it's a different kind of book because of it being narrative.
And so that kind of takes us on to talking about the text. Because Jonah is very different from the other prophetic books, being narrative rather than his words, how should we do we need to approach it differently to how we've approached some of the other books that we've looked at in the series?
Yes and no. No, in that we approach all Bible passages the same way. At one level, we are always wanting to know what is the background here, what's actually going on in the text, how was this heard in their context, how do we hear it today? So at that level, it's exactly the same. In many ways, Jonah is much, much easier than other prophets because narrative is more familiar to us. It's easier for us to understand what's going on. We still need to dig into it, but it's much more accessible to us than some of the other language of the prophets. We've talked about their imagery and some of the metaphors that are somewhat alien. They can make us stumble a little bit. We have to be prepared to slow down and to think hard about them. There's a danger there, of course, in that we read Jonah too quickly and at a too shallow level, because we don't have to stop and slow down. It feels very familiar to us, and therefore we don't necessarily think about it quite as hard as we should. But we do need to ask the question: if this is a prophetic book preserved in the scroll of the 12, we'll get to this later rather than now. But in what sense? How does this book speak to the people? Because that's still, it seems to me, its primary original function. It's not simply recording a nice story about what Jonah did, but this is God's word to his people then, and enduringly through the generations since.
Right. Should we just dig into the text? So if I read chapter 1 first, probably, and then you can comment on what you read. Chapter 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it, to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us, that we may not perish. And they said to one another, Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and of what people are you? And he said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid, and said to him, What is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then they said to him, What shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. He said to them, Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So, what do you make of chapter 1?
It's great, isn't it? It's perhaps worth commenting that the beginning of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 3 are very closely connected with each other. You've got almost a direct repeat to some extent of what's going on when we get to chapter 3. So the book divides into 2 halves. So, but it's, we've got a lot going on here, that the word of the Lord has come to Jonah saying, go one way, and he goes exactly the opposite way. And you've got this progression of going downwards as he flees. That Jonah rose to flee from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, and he paid the fare, and he went down into the ship. He's going away from the Lord, and then he goes. He lies down and goes to sleep. So he's going down in his flight from the Lord, which is quite fun.
And that's really important, because in verse 2, arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. So you can think of God as on high, if you like, and the evil has come up. He's noticed it. And therefore you might think, well, the way to get away from God is just going down, down, down and far away. And so you've got twice this reference, verse 3 and verse 4, actually twice in verse 3, from the presence of the Lord. And like, God's very difficult to escape from. And so there is this, comedic, ridiculous element to what he's doing. He's paying money, worst deal ever, to get away from God by going due west, Tarshish, various candidates in the Mediterranean for that. But the idea is something very, very far away. Nineveh is in Iraq. It's on the east. He's going west, and he is trying to get away. The other thing is very deliberate use of words. A friend of mine read this book out loud in Hebrew in 4 minutes. It's incredibly brief, but the use of the word great, that great city there in verse 2, but then God's response when he runs away is a great wind. That means a great tempest. So you will see a mighty tempest. Different words will come out in the English, or the great fish, the great fear that they have. There'll be great joy later on. All sorts of times this word is coming back again and again. There are other theme words, but I just love the fact that he runs away from God and God hurls a wind.
Yeah.
And, this is a very imprecise sort of thing to throw out a wind. You don't expect that's going to have a precise effect, because the wind caused the waves. The waves cause the boat to be breaking up. And there they are, throwing lots. And for me, calculating the physics of this is fascinating. So that you can think of a wind causing waves, causing boats to move around. And then inside this, the physics of people throwing around a lot so that it lands exactly, you can imagine it as like a die. It doesn't have to be like a modern one. But so it lands on Jonah. And then he's trying to escape the God who could do those sort of calculations. This is, for me, it is, absolutely extraordinary. And of course, God hurls the wind. Soon the sailors are hurling the cargo. Eventually, they're hurling Jonah. So you have this set of actions going on, which are absolutely fascinating in terms of the way it's so carefully crafted, and it's showing consequence of this ridiculous action of Jonah.
Yeah.
And just when, in terms of it, so he's fleeing from the Lord, and it says, I was just intrigued by when in verse 8 they're asking him, tell us what's going on. And he says, I'm a Hebrew and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, what is this you've done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. What's different? If he'd got on the boat and said, I'm fleeing from the Lord, what about that was like, okay, cool, you do you. And then when he then says, I'm a Hebrew and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea.
Yeah, so I think he's told them he's fleeing from the Lord after he's been woken up.
Oh, okay.
But the interesting thing is, I've seen it with young children, where they sometimes think when they shut their eyes that they become invisible. And so there's this idea that somehow if he just goes to sleep, God goes away, I think is there. But the sailors, of course, have a fascinating role, and here we got the captain, because the captain is telling the prophet to do some praying, which is a fascinating thing. The sailors end up sacrificing to God. The sailors are worried about innocent life. Oh, please, God, don't let us be guilty for innocent life. Whereas we're going to find later on, the prophet Jonah isn't remotely worried about having the blood of people of Nineveh on his hands and, whatever happens to them. So there is this reversal. Some people call him an anti-prophet, a revert, this inversion that's going on. But actually, I like verse 6 particularly, where, what do you mean, sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps God will give us a thought. Because in the pagan captain's mind, the storm is because a God is not thinking about them. Yes. Whereas in fact, the storm is precisely because God is thinking about Jonah. So again, it's the the subtlety here, the richness, it is massive, and then the fear. He fears God, but does he fear enough? Is a question.
It's so hollow, isn't it? If he did fear God, he would not be going on this ship. He would not be going down, down, down and heading the wrong direction. He's doing that precisely because he does not really fear God. So these I mean, I think it's a very hollow claim that he's making at that point. Or is he actually beginning to come to his senses and saying, yeah, the God that I claim to fear, the God I claim to speak for, he is the one who's made all of this, and therefore he is responsible. So it's no wonder that they fear a great fear, because this is not just a provincial God. This is not a territorial God. This is the ultimate God who made the sea and the dry land. They'd be very familiar with passengers from different places having gods from their own towns. Right. That, well, it's no big deal to us. But if this is the God who made the sea and the dry land, then they're really in trouble.
The narrative also is very good at having gradual increase, if you like. So that the storm is getting worse and worse the whole time. And these sailors are they're trying to outrow God, which is, difficult again. And so that's going on in verse 12 and 13, sorry. And they're calling out to God that, they shouldn't be guilty of this man's innocent blood. You've done as it pleased you. I mean, they really have got, a fairly good theology there. And then they're going to fear God again in verse 16. And it seems that they've gone from fearing to even more fearing. So we've got that in verse 10 versus verse 16. They begin by fearing, then they have a great fear. And so the storm's getting bigger the whole time. The ship's thinking of breaking up. Everything's, the word choice is so deliberate through this chapter, very dramatic, to get you to this point.
Yeah, I love the ship thought about breaking up. I mean, it's not obvious in English, but
in Hebrew, it's chishava lehishaver. Thought is chishava, hishaver is to break up. It thought about breaking up. And what you're finding here, that's something Tony's alluding to, is there's animation going on in the inanimate. So just as we're going to see in this book, there's a fish, big sea creature, which obeys God. We're going to find that there is a plant which obeys God. There's a plant-eating creature which obeys God. And all that's going on, and the whole final line is going to be about animals. But you have in this that the sea is getting angry. So they're actually talking about the sea ceasing from its raging, and we might read that as seas rage, don't they? But actually, in the Hebrew, it is more graphic. It's not just an analogy rage. This is proper anger. The sea's going to cease from its anger, and the ship is thinking about breaking up. And all of this is, again, what's the difference between something that's alive and not? God's will. That's the fundamental thing, like God who can raise up children to Abraham from stones. Stones are deaf to humans. They're not deaf to God. So you have this whole thing that the God who can animate anything is the God that this crazy prophet is fleeing. And that's just brought out for us, so beautifully in this chapter.
That, just to say that, so that's verse 4. It says, in the ESV it says, so that the ship threatened to break up. You're saying that would, the ship thought
and so
break up.
When you look in a dictionary at this word, threaten, this is the only occurrence you can find with that meaning. And of course, you can take it even in English in more than one sense. Something's threatened to happen. You can have it in an inanimate sense, but you can also have it threatened to break up if you read that more in an animated way. So I think that may be part of the reason behind the word choice here for the English Standard Version. It does seem to have those two possibilities.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, well, I was just going to say, with the word choice being so careful, then when you, in verse 3, he paid the fare, it's not, it's clearly in Hebrew, it's not he paid his fare, he paid its fare, he paid the fare for the ship. So actually, Jonah is investing a huge amount of money to because it appears that he is funding the whole ship's fare, the whole ship's voyage to go to Tarshish. He's sunk everything into running away from the Lord.
Sorry, what verse was
verse
that?
3.
Verse 3.
So as you say, yeah, absolutely the worst deal ever.
Yes.
But he's heading to Tarshish, which is it's thought to be Spain, probably.
That's the most likely, but there are other possibilities.
But when you look at references to Tarshish in the rest of Scripture, apart from the one reference in the end of Isaiah where it's a little more ambiguous, in every other place, Ezekiel 27 in particular, it's associated with luxury. So he's spending a lot of money, but he's trying to escape to a place where he seems to be imagining he's going to have to be able to live an idle, luxurious life free from the interventions of God and God's requirements to go and speak to Nineveh. We've talked before about the idea of shalom within the whole of the Hebrew Bible, but within the prophets, in the four relationships with God, with other people, with the world around us, and with ourselves. You see all of these within Jonah. But Jonah is heading off, having emptied his coffers. He's heading off to try and build some pseudo shalom on his own terms. And what he finds is exactly the opposite of what he's looking for, because everything is falling apart. And even the ship and the sea, these apparently inanimate objects, they're against him too, because they've been animated by the Lord.
Okay, and so then this chapter ends with Jonah being swallowed by a big fish. Anything to say on that?
Well, I mean, a few things. Firstly, the Lord appointed a great fish, we read. And so that's appointed, you get again in chapter 4, verse 6, 4, verse 7, 4, verse 8, where God appoints a plant, then a worm, then an east wind. So again, God just in charge of everything. And then great fish, people, the meaning of the word fish has changed over the last couple of 100 years since Linnaeus. So that now things like whales not classed as fish, but in the taxonomy of day back then, basically everything in the sea that's swimming around is a fish. It's interesting when you get this word used in the Gospels. It uses the word ketos. We get cetacean and other words like that from for a whale. And yes, absolutely extraordinary. And Christ picks this up in Matthew chapter 12 as a picture of his own burial and then eventual resurrection, as we're going to see that he doesn't stay in the belly of the fish or whale. So absolutely unforgettable.
From time to time, you hear people making a great thing of the possibility. How is this physically possible for somebody to be in the belly of a humpback whale or of a whale shark or wherever? And there's still a story circulating around on the internet of this guy called James Bartlett, who was swallowed by a humpback whale in the South Atlantic in the late 1800s from a whaling ship. There's absolutely no evidence for this story whatsoever, and yet it circulates. And why do we have to feel that we have to bend over backwards to try to justify something where, I mean, clearly the Lord has sent this great fish.
It's absolutely miraculous. Yeah.
This is a miraculous thing.
There was actually a video recently of a guy being swallowed in a kayak and being spat back out again.
He was spat out pretty quickly. He wasn't in there.
I didn't see that. Obviously need to get on TikTok for this.
So he's going to be called Jonah for the rest of his life, isn't he? But yeah, we don't need to reach for fanciful tales and for stories that have no basis in history. When we believe in a God who has all of the elements and all of the creatures at his disposal and can make them work in whatever way he likes, it's not difficult for him.
Yeah, and I think also, the point is that in ordinary circumstances, this would be certain death. And so there is that sense in which this is very much like a resurrection. Okay, Jonah doesn't actually die. But, there is this amazing miracle that he is preserved and lives to appear again in this wonderful book.
Great. Well, we'll draw it to a close there for this episode. So we'll continue talking about Jonah in the next episode. Thanks very much for joining us. Thank you both for joining me. Please do rate, review, subscribe, and let us know in the comments any questions that you've got or any thoughts and reflections from the episode. Thanks for listening.